When the Sinking City originally came out all the way back in 2019, many reviews, including our own, spoke about how the game had plenty of great ideas that were marred by uneven execution, mediocre visuals, and clunky controls. Now, more than half a decade later, developer Frogwares is back with the Sinking City Remastered, this time around with a brand new coat of paint, and it's now time for us to take a look back at the investigative horror game and see if its problems have been solved with the use of Unreal Engine 5.
You can't take me! Eat this!
The Sinking City Remastered is definitely a demanding game in terms of the raw horsepower required to max out its visual effects. On my system, an AMD Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, 32GB of GDDR5 RAM, and an AMD Radeon RX 7800 XT, I was obviously not able to max out the graphics while still hanging on to a reasonable frame rate. With everything cranked up to its highest and FSR set to native anti-aliasing, the game would crawl along at between 30 to 40 FPS. However, just the act of switching FSR to quality mode and disabling ray tracing instantly doubled my frame rates. The higher resolution textures, as well as support for modern features like FSR/DLSS, depending on your graphics card of course, as well as frame generation, means that the Sinking City Remastered can certainly have moments where it looks absolutely gorgeous. However, there are still some places where the game can look quite rough. Characters, for example, are expertly modeled and animated, especially in conversations. However, just about every instance of facial hair on a character ends up looking like a cartoonish mess of colored blobs. This is despite the fact that some of the smaller nuances of a character's model tends to have had great attention and detail paid to it. A perfect example is protagonist Charles Reed, whose eyes are red because he hasn't been able to get a proper night's sleep for quite some time now. This is communicated purely through visual storytelling and never gets brought up in a bout of exposition-laden dialogue.
Okay, this might ring a bell. My guy has a deep axe wound in his shoulder.
Sir, I really don't have time for rifling through paperwork, but you're welcome to take a look at our archives if it means that much to you.
It looks like hard work in these conditions. You need a hand?
Well, yes, actually, but it may result in close contact with the wiles. Is that going to be a problem?
Overall atmosphere and the investigative gameplay is one department where the Sinking City didn't really need much in the way of improvements, and the remastered release makes this clear by making minimal changes in this regard. The city of Oakmont remains one of the most interesting takes inspired by the horror stylings of H.P. Lovecraft, melding together elements from several of his stories into one larger tableau that is an absolute joy to explore. The setup to this story is about as Lovecraftian as you can get. Private investigator Charles Reed is drawn to the city of Oakmont because of repeated nightmares he has been having, where he starts hearing strange voices calling to him to the depths as his ship is stranded in some sort of limbo between the ocean and the sky, while a gigantic leviathan floats overhead. Things don't get much easier for Reed once he does land in Oakmont, however. Outsiders aren't really trusted much in the city, which happens to have its own problems, with water levels rising, strange monstrous creatures showing up, and the Grand families taking part in their own political machinations. Reed is able to discover that many at Oakmont are seemingly having the same nightmares and visions as him, which culminates in him getting his major case, his first one, figure out what happened to an expedition that was exploring the connection between the flood that ruined much of Oakmont and the visions that many are actually having. It's a fairly classic Lovecraftian setup and leans in quite hard on what has essentially become Frogwares' forte at this point, investigative gameplay. As Reed, you have to take on cases, find clues, and figure out what's happening. To help you with this, Reed is equipped with a supernatural ability called the Mind's Eye. This ability lets him track more mundane things, like the trail of someone that was running away, as well as more complex things, like giving Reed the ability to recreate scenes from the past that he must then put together in chronological order.
Hello? Hey, can you hear me?
Oh, man. What? Who are you?
It's okay. I'm Charles Reed, private.
Oh, okay. What do you want?
The investigative aspects of the Sinking City Remastered are the parts that shine the brightest in what ends up feeling like an otherwise dull gem. Much like a real-world private investigator would have to do, Reed would need to find clues at the local newspaper's archives, talk to the police to try and get access to their records, talk to witnesses, discover smaller clues, and ultimately connect all the dots in his head to get a clear picture of what's actually going on. While investigations can often feel like intricate puzzles that are really fun to solve, the other main part of the gameplay in the Sinking City Remastered, the combat, still feels like it shouldn't have been there at all to begin with. Every now and then you'll have to get into a fight, be it against other people or more commonly against otherworldly horrors that can eat up your sanity just as quickly as they eat up your health. To take them on, Reed can get his hands on a number of weapons, from a simple pistol to start out with, all the way up to a rifle, a shotgun, and a submachine gun. While the controls don't quite feel as janky and awkward as they did back in the game's original 2019 release, the changes made in the remastered version don't really help justify their presence in the game much anyway. Combat encounters can swing wildly in difficulty, where sometimes they feel like they were simple point-and-click affairs that were only there to eat into your precious piles of ammo, or incredibly difficult fights where your enemies end up feeling like bullet sponges. The unfortunate thing is that the combat often tends to interrupt some of the more fun parts of the Sinking City Remastered, and it tends to be a bit of a pace killer when you're hot on the trail of a suspect but have to be distracted by this strange creature that you either have to kill or sneak around while just hoping that it doesn't actually see you. The game manages to keep its creepy, tense atmosphere just fine most of the time, and combat feels like a completely unnecessary addition to this game. The progression system feels similarly unnecessary. As Reed continues his investigations, he will inevitably earn experience points, which eventually translate into knowledge points that can then be used up on unlocking new passive abilities. These tend to be fairly simple, like giving Reed more health, the ability to carry more bullets, or flat damage increases for certain weapons. The lack of anything that might aid the investigative gameplay stops the progression system from feeling like it was a natural addition to the game. Rather, it feels incredibly tacked on. The Sinking City Remastered fixes quite a few of the issues we had with the original release. Most of the visuals have been improved by leaps and bounds over what we saw back in 2019, and the overall movement in combat doesn't feel nearly as awkward as it used to. However, there are still places where the game's lack of polish, be it the awkward facial hair on characters, or the completely unnecessary combat and stealth sequences. Despite this, however, the Sinking City Remastered is once again one of the better games out there that manages to tackle the horror themes of H.P. Lovecraft. So, what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and share them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. We upload every day and would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.